The Old Testament writer of the book of Sirach reflects on the fourth commandment, thou shalt honor thy father and thy mother. It, along with the second commandment, are the two positive commandments within the Decalogue. These are the two that say, keep holy the Sabbath, or honor your father and mother. They don't say, thou shalt not. What Sirach reflects on is the rewards that go to the one who indeed follows this commandment. And he gives all sorts of circumstances, even do not revile your father when his mind fails. What are the rewards that go along with this fourth commandment? Riches are one of them. A long life is another. Forgiveness of sins. And the fact that the Lord will hear our prayers. So indeed, Sirach paints a picture of the blessedness of the one who follows this commandment. Paul's advice in the second reading today is similar when he says, put on love and be thankful in all your relationships. He gives a kind of household code that was familiar to people in those days, where he basically paints the picture that all members of the household are to be respected and cherished, nurtured and supported. And that means that basically people grow up in a household that reminds them of how good they are, how God has created them good, and how they are expected to follow in that same goodness in the way they treat one another. There once was a judge who always had a standard little homily that he would give to couples as they came to him to get married in his court. He says to them, see that you never convert your family into a courtroom. Instead, let it be a confessional. If a husband and wife start arguing like attorneys in an attempt to justify their behavior, the family becomes a court of law and nobody wins. On the other hand, if the husband and wife treat the family and their relationship as a confessional, ready to admit their faults and try to correct them, then the family becomes a heavenly one. It has always been said that the family is the building block of society. Research into many cultures that have disintegrated and are no longer among us in the world today tell us that that disintegration or that demise often began with the demise of the family, where the traditional values that held them together began to be lost. This matches what is the devil's 7-step strategy for destroying society and winning souls for hell. The first thing the devil would want to do is to corrupt society. And he does that by injecting into us a fluid kind of morality that says there's nothing objective anymore, and there's nothing certain about what's right and wrong. Anything goes. He then acts in ways to undermine family life itself. And he does that with prosperity and material goods and activities. These are good things in and of themselves, but when taken to the extreme, have a way of taking family life and making it secondary to all the activities that people are involved in, or all of the things that they thirst to have, in order to have more and more. Family life that is pulled apart by the busyness of our society is the devil's third strategy for tearing down society. The next thing he's going to do is he's going to attack stable marriages. And he does this in a couple different ways. In particular, he makes it easy for people to get divorced and makes it impossible for them to find ways always at their disposal to help themselves. And that impossibility comes with pride, because they haven't learned already to admit their faults. One of the things that has happened in the 20s and 30s is actually when the sexual revolution started. And with the advent of contraception about 50 years ago, actually marriages began to be unglued a bit in terms of what they're all about. And so we move into the fifth strategy of the devil, to loosen the glue of sexual fidelity, to question whether or not any kind of sexual mores that we might have had are really legitimate, because they deny our freedom to do whatever we want to do. Another thing that contraception allowed to happen is the separation of children from the sexual act. And so consequently, people can experience genital activity without any kind of consequences. The next thing that the devil does is he tries to promote and defend the sexual revolution, which in our society has only now started to produce its real fruits, as we question even what marriage is. And finally, the devil will do this. He will use all the media and every means possible to sow these seeds into the minds of the young, who then grow up in a society that is not supported in the sexual morality or in the family kind of stability, and these things start to then weaken from within. The family is still best seen still today as a man and a woman and children, made possible by the commitment of the two people in the first place, but weakened by the easy availability of contraception. Because the bottom line is, gentlemen, men want sex without commitment. Pregnancy used to translate into commitment. It doesn't do that anymore today, because pregnancy can be avoided by contraception or eliminated by abortion. And so women who always have looked for commitment in order to support the child that grows within, also now begin to carry the same burden all by themselves, as we see broken families evidencing this. Sexuality is an extremely powerful force in our lives. It needs to be tamed, and this taming happens when we experience in our lives faithful relationships. Sexuality, when it's expressed genitally by the unmarried, carries no longer the thread of commitment, and so men are unleashed to pursue sex without any consequences. And consequently then, women themselves are degraded by the lie of contraception, which has already begun to enslave men, and it turns women into men when it comes to this passion. The devil has made huge headways in corrupting marriage, in breaking families, and in producing so much absent dads in our society today. Moms and grandmothers having to raise the children without the presence of a father in the house. And how important that is when it comes to the issue of responsibility. Because once you start breeding irresponsibility into society, you start cutting the core rebars that hold it together. And no longer do you have people carrying out the duty of what it means to function in society. This Feast of the Holy Family makes the warm and cozy nativity scene suddenly grow up and help us to smell the coffee. Because there is a great deal of challenge to family life today that I've outlined, but there still is a great deal of help the Lord has given us in order to maintain what is most important. We know that Jesus grew up in the Holy Family. Fulton Sheen talked about it, that he had 3 days of suffering to redeem us, 3 years to teach us, and 30 years of obedience to also give us an example of what it means to follow God's way. 30 years of obedience as he took care of Mary and Joseph and lived with them in Nazareth. Some of the characteristics that Jesus had in his life that perhaps we can reflect and maybe compare with our own are things that he learned when he was little. Jesus prayed each morning. He prayed spontaneously. He found a place alone to pray. He prayed with friends. He fasted and he marked holy days. We heard that in the gospel today. This is something Jesus did when he was 30 years, 31, 32, 33. Why? Because he learned it when he was little. He learned it at the feet of his parents. Next thing about Jesus that we know is that he knew what work was. He was known to be Joseph's son, or the carpenter's son. And so he learned that trade over those 30 years, taking care of things at home. And tradition tells us that Joseph died somewhere along the way, and so Jesus was the only caretaker, really, that Mary had. It comes out when Jesus talks about building a tower, or it comes out when he talks about planning for a battle. He learned these kind of things at the feet of Joseph. Joseph taught him how to think about things in a practical way. And then Mary, her own household work and details that he observed and that he participated in, helped him to draw some of his best in parables, like patching the right piece of cloth onto a garment, or setting aside enough leaven for the baking the next day, or searching the house for a lost coin. You can see that Jesus probably heard these things, learned these things, saw these things happen in his own home, and he found God in the midst of them, and then preached it to us in the form of parables. The Catechism tells us that the home is the place where virtue is learned. Now, virtue is not a word that we often use in our everyday language, but virtue is what builds up family and builds up society. What virtue does is it helps us to subordinate material pleasures and instinctual pleasures for the sake of something greater. In other words, save your money to buy something for yourself is something a parent teaches a child. That's supporting your material interests for something greater, teaching them frugality and teaching them how to know what a dollar means. Also, there are instinctual kinds of reactions to things. Kids who fight, kids who get angry with one another, kids who lie, all those instinctual things to protect ourselves, all those things need to be mastered. And we learn that as we grow up at home. To master our anger, to not hit our brother, all those sort of things are the things that are substantially important in order to build this self-denial, sound judgment, and self-mastery that makes it possible for us to be virtuous. Because what is virtue? Virtue is choosing what is good, even though sometimes it is very difficult to do that, and to choose it regularly and with a habit. And so we become a habitual teller of the truth. We become a habitual person who's in control of his anger. These are important things that we learn at home. And so, children can examine themselves today on this Feast of the Holy Family. Honor your father and mother. How well do we do that? And parents can examine themselves too, in terms of how you communicate to your parents, to your children, and to your own parents, the importance that they have in your life. You know, humorously, we can talk about children always being the joy of their parents when they're young. And we are, so we love little kids. They can be just really fun. And then we can also talk about how important children are when it comes to parents getting older. How important children are to look over mom and dad and see how things are going, or clean the gutters. Whatever it is that helps us to take care of mom and dad when we get old enough to do that. In between, there's that wonderful phase called teenage life, when parents are truly tested with every possible virtue in their own lives, to be patient with their children and to love them when you want to kill them. Unfortunately, teenage years are going on and on these days, sometimes to the age 30. Now, no family is perfect, but God will work with what we give Him, as long as we give it to Him, as we tie Him into this relationship, this family relationship. You can't do it by yourself. You need God's help. He'll take the good intentions you have and every effort you make and every good decision you make, and He'll multiply it so that it covers over the times when you make those mistakes. The sacrament of marriage, I believe, needs to be called on by moms and dads frequently in your prayer life. Lord, you gave me this spouse, and I love her or I love him. Help me to grow in grace so that I can use this grace for the furtherance of our relationship, get my spouse to heaven, and help my kids grow up well. That calling on God to give you the grace that comes in that sacrament is not something that happens just on your wedding day. It happens every time you turn to Him in prayer. Because a marriage is much more than just two legs on a stool. It'll never stand by itself. You need that third leg. in order to keep a balance. And that third leg is inviting God into the midst of your marriage. The next thing that is the most positive way in which you can kind of sense put up force against this society that wishes to break down your marriage and your family, pray with your kids and your family. This is one of the beautiful things about our family formation program here, is that those families that are involved in it and participate in those home activities find ways to pray with their kids. Because that's one thing that doesn't come natural to us Catholics, to pray with one another. We know what it means to go to church. We know what it means to maybe say a prayer before we go to bed, but praying with others is not something that's easy, and so family formation helps us to do that. I was blessed to be able to be in one of the family's homes recently, and they were praying the little Advent prayer that was part of the family formation thing. And finally, to learn to laugh at yourself, because there's no degree in parenting. There's just experience and practical wisdom and the examples that you get from your family and the teachings of the church. So when it seems at times that the wheels have fallen off of your family wagon, the first thing you have to do is stop and pray and ask for God's help. And then the second thing you've got to do is you've got to talk to your spouse about it, honestly and openly. And if there's no spouse to talk to, then talk to mom or dad. Because their advice will come in two different ways. Don't do what I did, or do what I did. You'll get both sides of it. You grew up with them. You know how that works. And then have a family meeting. If your kids are old enough to participate, it's oftentimes the quiet one that will offer the most interesting and fruitful advice. And finally, love each other. Love each other a lot. And tell each other how you are good, and you are loved, and I love you. Old Winston Churchill was quoted many times with one of these statements that he made during World War II as he was bolstering his English people. He talked about how they would fight. They would never give up. They will fight on the beaches. They will fight on the landing grounds. They will fight in the fields and in the streets and in the hills. We will fight and never give up. Unfortunately, sometimes that sounds like many family vacations, doesn't it? And that's what it means to be bringing God in the middle of it, is that we're not perfect at this business, but with the Lord, we can overcome the imperfections and overcome the challenges that come from our world.